congressman will be right here.
Well, good morning. Good to see you all here. We wondered how many would be here since we were still in shutdown yesterday, and so we had to make a decision on whether we'd send out the robocalls. And because it got too late, we couldn't send the robocalls out. And yesterday, is it better? And sometimes when you get too close, it then gets the feedback. So we had a Grass Lake town hall yesterday that, again, we had sent invitations out for, mail, but we didn't do the robocalls. And I think just relatively few in number showed up for that. So we were hoping yesterday afternoon we could get those robocalls out, but watching the glacier move in the Senate just didn't allow that to happen. And so finally, when the shutdown was ended, it was too late to get the robocalls out. So I'm glad to see you here today. I just got off at WJR, and I pointed out right as soon as I got on that I have a town hall here at Cambridge Township Hall, and so hopefully maybe some heard that hadn't had forgotten about the mailing or whatever may come out as well. But you're here. It has been an interesting few days looking for a place to just put this down here. We do a lot of talking and negotiating and etc. for the past few days in Washington. Again, while we hope that the Schumer shutdown would end sooner than it actually did. Glad because of the pressure that began to come from the people. Senator Schumer's colleagues began to talk to him behind the scenes and saying, this can't continue. It's not going to work out. We as Republicans found that out in 2013 with our shutdown, a shutdown that I didn't support. But nonetheless, the votes weren't there to keep that from happening. We found out it didn't help, it hurt. And we had hoped that that would be a learning experience for Chuck Schumer. Let me just give you a thumbnail sketch of actually what went on. Back in September, according to Hoyle, according to the Constitution, the House sent under regular order 12 appropriations bills to the Senate on time, in budget, and prepared for them to take a look at. To take pot shots at, to change, to alter, to debate on the floor, and ultimately to pass their form of the appropriations bills that completes the budget process. That hasn't taken to this day. Those 12 bills still sit there with multiple amendments that we put on while we debated them under regular order in the House. Over 1,000 amendments were offered, 700 were considered, 2 of which were mine that were passed and went along with the package to the Senate. So since September, end of September, those bills have languished there in the Senate, filibustered, and not allowed the 60 votes necessary to bring it up even for consideration. So you got to understand, when I hear Chuck Schumer and I hear Steny Hoyer in the House talk about the need for us to finally get a full appropriations package, and it's time to get it done, quit using these CRs and everything else, that at the very least frustrates me to hear that. We've done it. And that 12 bill package put into one complete bill, appropriations bill, sent to the Senate, was passed in a bipartisan fashion as well. So, the only reason we had to do a CR was to keep the government open, fund appropriate things, especially thinking of our military, the Children's Health Insurance Program, CHIP, known as My Child here in Michigan, and we did all of that. We put no poison pills in, we didn't put defunding of Planned Parenthood or things like that in this CR. That's in our 12 bill package that's already passed and sent over to the Senate. We just did the basics. Make sure our military and their families were taken care of, including what took place in Hillsdale just last week because of the shutdown. A reservist, Army reservist, who was having his retirement planned for last Saturday, couldn't have it because of the shutdown. Those are personal things that happen when things like this, political things like this, take place. We had coverage, full coverage for CHIP. In fact, the longest extension of CHIP in the history of CHIP, 6 years, fully funded. That impacts 7,000 CHIP recipients, kids and pregnant women in my district, 83,000 in Michigan. All had the opportunity of not getting that coverage if the shutdown continued. And so we fought it hard. And thankfully, we saw that end yesterday afternoon, and quickly after the Senate completed their vote, House took it up, it was passed, and now we have 3 weeks. The only change that was made in that entire shutdown period was taking it from 4 weeks down to 3 weeks. Now, I don't see that as a rational reason to have shut government down, just to get 1 less week to consider DACA, which negotiations were going on. And let me share for you. Some of you watched it on TV when the president got the leadership of House and Senate, Republicans and Democrats, in his conference room, and they negotiated down to 4 points that they agreed upon that would be their negotiation in dealing with the immigration issue. And those four points, which have been confirmed, were these: DACA, a way forward on that; border security; family reunification or chain migration, 2 names for the same thing; and visa lottery. Those 4 items were the only 4 that are now on the table for those negotiators. Now, they're fairly broad. They've taken a lot of area, but they agreed to do that. Those negotiations were still going on by some of the members of that team, including some Democrats, this weekend during the shutdown. The end around by Lindsey Graham and Chuck Schumer that attempted to take place was outside of this and had never been agreed to. And so we're back on that plan again. We have 3 weeks. Those negotiations will take place. In the House, there are 3 bills dealing with DACA, border control, immigration laws. The one that I co-sponsored is the Goodlatte bill, and that probably has the majority of support within our conference to move forward. But we also know that in order to get it through the Senate, there will probably be significant compromise that goes on. But in the end, the president has to sign it. And he campaigned on these issues, and it would be irresponsible for him to back away from the basic guts of what he said, "I will do if I'm president." So that'll take place in the next 3 weeks. We do not want another government shutdown. We are not negotiating in a shutdown. That was very clear, and that'll continue. So pretty much that's where we're at right now, and I'm here to hear your comments and address your questions and concerns. So, Mr. Moderator, why don't we get to that? Thank you for helping us out.
No problem. I'm basically going right through these just as they were handed to me, so right in the order. We'll start off with Mike from Onsted. Just says, I would like you to talk a little bit about Joe DeGenova, former Fed prosecutor.
Joe DeGenova, what should I talk about? Give me some help on that.
What's going on with his investigation of, I think it's Hillary or whatever?
Well, there are investigations that are going on a number of fronts relative to Russia, relative to some of the FBI dealings. As many of you heard this last week, there's a memo that's been put together dealing with some very significant concerns about how the FBI at some of its top leadership function. I've read that memo. It's a top secret memo. I can't legally comment on it, but I can say what I read in the first page, and it was not a long document. shocked me, scared me. And so there has been a request by a good number of our colleagues, myself included, that this document be open to the public. Now the question is, and I believe that the Intelligence Committee, Chairman Nunez, and others will do a good job in making sure that if it is to be released, and there's a process that has to follow, and the key point in the process, the President will have to sign off on opening it up. I would assume he would, but we have to do it in such a way to be prepared that he might not, because then there would be the obligation for us to consider overriding his no. It's not a veto, but just overriding a no. Again, I don't think the President, if we have this document scrubbed and make it very evident that we're not giving away information that could really cause potential harm to some of our CIA, FBI officials, clandestine forces. We don't want to out them. There have been people in the past when outings have taken place who have died. We don't want that to happen. And we also want to make sure, to the best of our abilities, that it is not a political document, if you get what I'm saying. I think there needs to be, where legally possible, enough background data, information, alliteration, acknowledgments that show that this is not a political document, but is backed up with facts, without giving away things that could cause significant harm to our country or to an individual in our country. But what I read in this document, I think the people ought to see it and judge for themselves. So as far as Joe DeGenova and his investigations, there are a lot of investigations going on. And many behind the scenes that have gone on for quite some time, and some by House and Senate committees, several committees in the House that are looking at a number of things, but we need to get it right.
Next we have Joyce from Brooklyn. She'd like to start off by saying thank you for passing the tax cut. Next, I'd like to show the note and find the missing 5 months worth of text messages. And no amnesty for illegal dreamers, protect legal Americans.
Well, I appreciate that. The tax cut bill, Tax Cut Jobs Act bill, as it was formally named, passed. That took a lot of debate, a lot of effort to go on, and that's fine. But the statements that were made that this would be Armageddon, well, if this is Armageddon so far, I'll take Armageddon. And you have over 160 business and corporations now, and there are a few more coming out. One I'd love to talk about today, but we haven't been given final authorization to mention it, but it's going to, we have been given it. DTE has come out, and because of the tax cuts, there'll be, RJ, what was in dollar amount? Millions of dollars amount reduction in cost to the ratepayers. So consumers I talked with last week, and they are scrubbing their books as well. Their commitment is to reduce the cost of the ratepayer as well, but we don't have figures. But DTE has now come out, and I forget, it's multiple millions of dollars of rate reductions that will impact all of their ratepayers, businesses and individuals as well. But we've seen increases in wages, we've seen bonuses, and Nancy Pelosi says $1,000, $2,000 one-time bonus. Those are crumbs, not to a lot of people. That's a vacation, or that's buying a health insurance policy. That's not crumbs to most people in the proverbial flyover zone that I'm proud to live in, where there's a lot of common sense that you won't find in San Francisco. Those things are going on. The tax cut bill is working, and it will continue to work. And it was keyed in making sure that middle class received the largest percentage of impact, which it did. The upper class, the 1%ers, got the least percentage benefit from it. And that's fact. So we're going to continue working. Any policy like that isn't one and done. There's some other things we'd like to do, just couldn't get it through the process. But those we'll have opportunities in the future. On the other issues, might not have been any comment on it, but
5 months of text messages.
oh yeah, 5 months of text. That's another example of why these investigations have to continue. In the memo that I read, of course, there'll be some pushback already. But the memo I read, shocking enough to me, that when I hear now publicly, if it's been made public, there's probably some more even still behind that, of how in the world the FBI would lose 5 months of email messages that are pertinent to our understanding of what's going on key issues that have taken the spotlight for the last 1 year of this new president's administration, and has put a pallor over all of that. Rightly or wrongly, but nonetheless, if we see this type of thing with the FBI, that ought to give us concern that something isn't working correctly. And so those investigations will continue and should continue.
Next, Joanne from Cement City would like you to talk a little bit about Benghazi, core curriculum, and Obamacare.
Is this yours?
I understand you're working on Obamacare, and please continue with that. Number 2, where are we at with Benghazi?
Benghazi continues to be one of those issues under consideration. There has been some movement on it. Trey Gowdy, in chairing his committee on oversight, which I used to be on until I was put on the Energy and Commerce Committee. I'm delighted to be there. But the Oversight Committee still has investigators working on that. There have been subpoenas that have been offered for further information. But sadly with Benghazi, some of what's going on has just ended, and some of the trails we've gone through, there have been blockages and people unwilling to speak, and I think a lot of that unwillingness has come from how certain ones who came forward initially were treated, and they just don't want to go through that. Sadly, Brian Terry is still the ultimate loser, losing his life as a result of a Fast and Furious issue that you mentioned. But Benghazi is another issue where getting into the inner workings of the White House at the time, of Hillary Clinton as Secretary of State, I think some of the issues are going to begin to resurface again as we look at some of the email trails that are continue to be followed. It hasn't been forgotten, but a lot of coverage went on there. What was the other?
Core curriculum.
Core curriculum. That's a state issue. Common Core, if you're referring to that,
That's right, yeah.
we did away with in our education reauthorization that we did last year, and the President signed it, President Obama signed this one, in fact. We did away with a mandate to the states to follow Common Core. If they want to follow it, they can, but it's up to the states. And I think that's where it should be. We ought to devolve the federal government as much as possible. In fact, I believe completely, from dealing with education in the states. That's the state's responsibility. It's a constitutional responsibility. We have no constitutional authority or responsibility in the federal government to deal with it. But because we have education department in place now, we have to work toward solutions and devolve our approach. Right now we're in the House Education and Workforce Committee, which I still am serving on, and chairing a subcommittee there. We passed the Higher Education Act out. It's on the floor of the House now. We hope it'll be taken up. But there we set some very clear principles, even in higher education, giving more authority back to the states, giving more options and flexibility in how federal grants and loan programs are used, including toward apprenticeship programs and the like, to get at the needs we really have in the real world today of people who are trained for real world jobs that deal with technology, with advanced manufacturing, tool and die work, all of the things that made this country great, while still having a place for a 4-year college or university education. But not everybody needs that, but they all need continuing education.
Next one comes from Zach from Manitowoc Beach. If you get a tax cut, would the amount of money be the same as the amount you lose in your tax return? You get a bigger paycheck at first, but then lose it, I'm assuming is what he wants to say.
I'll take the chance on having a tax cut and having a pay increase because of it, and most likely because we doubled the standard exemption. It's not going to hurt you. We doubled it to individual from $6,000 to $12,000, and for a couple filing jointly, we doubled it from 12 to 24. And so if you're getting a tax cut, and then because of the tax cuts that go to the business, your employer, they can give you a pay increase, unless it's exorbitant. I think you're going to still find out you're to the good. As I recollect the figures that were out there, for the average median family making $72,000 a year joint income of a family of 4, their earning capabilities, including their tax cut. Oh, it's right behind me? Oh, okay. There it is, folks. The family of 4, $73,000, 58% tax bill reduction, savings of $2,059. You add a pay increase to that, it's going to be tough to not see probably a $4,000 increase in your financial capabilities as a result of tax cut and pay wage increase.
Russ from Tipton would like you to talk a little bit about Social Security and Medicare.
Social Security and Medicare are in trouble. I think we all recognize that. I think many of us out here in the flyover zone stick our heads in the sand. Medicare has been in deficit since 2010. Social Security, because of the recent tax cuts, it was neat to see just a week and a half ago a report come out that because of that, there's actually more money now going into the Social Security Trust Fund. And because of the extremely low unemployment rate that is in place right now, and we're seeing continue, that's adding dollars in the Social Security Trust Fund, but it still has a problem, so I'm not going to try to paint it any brighter than that. So we have to fix it. We have made a promise. I'm on Medicare, so this is not something that, to me, is this a question you want? Okay, we can do that. This isn't something that I don't take a great interest in. We've made promises, and promises are to be kept. And over the course of quite a few years, we've done things that have put in light the potential of breaking those promises. That shouldn't be the case. All people that are on Social Security, Medicare, or soon to be on Social Security, Medicare, should be able to believe that they're going to have what they were promised. And so what will it be necessary to do to make sure that takes place? And the basic answer is whatever it takes. Number one, I don't have great hopes about it, but I'd like to see the Senate believe that they would take up my bill that puts in place a lockbox on Social Security funds, saying that they can only be used for Social Security or Medicare purposes and not used for other purposes that Congress might determine they need to use them for, because it's a fund they can cost out and say, we will put it toward this and we'll pay it back sometime. That's not how it should be. We have to look at age limits. We have to look at what we do for younger people who many haven't even started in the workplace yet. What can we make as far as the plan for them for the future that will provide them with a greater certainty than expecting that Social Security will be there for them, especially now with the boomer generation mounting up and going into retirement. And so it has to be worked on. And so when you hear, with the campaign times coming up, the normal fear and smear tactic that says the Republicans are going to take away your Social Security and your Medicare, stop and ask yourself this question first before you're pulled into believing that, which isn't true. Do Republicans take Social Security? Do Republicans go on Medicare? Do Republicans have sick family members? Do they have, speaking of Obamacare, do they have pre-existing conditions like Democrats do? And the answer to all of those is, of course they do. We are Americans united in issues that we all face. We have to find a solution to it. So when you hear the attack against changing or altering entitlement programs like Social Security and Medicare, and again, those are entitlement programs. Welfare isn't an entitlement program. I'm entitled to receive my Social Security check when I take my Social Security check because I paid into it. I'm entitled to receive Medicare because I paid into it. Involuntarily, I paid into it. So I'm entitled to that benefit. And I appreciate the fact that Paul Ryan, our speaker, is committed to entitlement reform that makes sense and protects the promise that you and I have received under Social Security. I think FDR, if he were living today, would be one of the strongest proponents. In fact, I think he would have pushed back against many of the changes that have gone on and additions to Social Security, which is, when he implemented, it was just a very small, basic supplement to assist in the future. It wasn't to be the end-all. It wasn't at that time to have health care dealing with it. It wasn't to have SSI. It wasn't all sorts of things. I think today he'd be here and saying, let's get this thing fixed so we can move forward. So I'm committed to doing that and really push back against any fear and smear. And if you hear me saying that, push back against me as well. This is something we have to address or it's going to melt down and there will be people hurt.
Tom from Onsted would like an update on how we are doing with the fight of heroin use.
We're losing. And I think that's why there's been such aggressive action taken in the last couple of years. Bipartisan. Debbie Dingell and I have worked together on several bills and have one key bill that thankfully is through the Senate, sits in the House, and hopefully it will be added to a package very shortly that will be signed by the President, Jesse's Law. But there are a number of other things we're trying to get at, looking at the whole perspective of where it's generated from, including in our pharmaceutical, medical industry, the overprescription, the lack of understanding of where these prescriptions can go and how they can be used, looking at alternatives to opioids that would work for the majority of people, and then also being able to make sure that people who genuinely need these painkillers because of debilitating chronic conditions that they will probably never be free from, that we still have an ability for them to get them, to receive that care, but not to be abused by someone else. And so we've looked at all sorts of areas dealing with law enforcement, medical profession, education, as well as alternatives. And that's why we were delighted in a bipartisan fashion to get 21st Century Cures bill through last year, signed by President Obama, that put more money toward the National Institutes of Health that can be used in finding additional things. And Francis Collins, who heads NIH, was in a meeting with him, in fact, in the White House on the opioids issue that I'd been invited over for. And he said, he said, we're this close to a non-opioid painkiller. We're this close. And he said, that's why we appreciate the funding that came through 21st Century Cures. It's an ongoing deal, and I think the additional effort has to start in our homes, in our communities, in our schools, in our churches, in talking about this issue and discouraging people from finding answers to their life in drugs, and then from opioids generally then leading into heroin. There are too many people dying. You know, the death rate in this country, or the age rate in this country has dropped in the last 3 years consistently. And it's dropped only because, not the fact that we're not having more babies and that people who live healthy lifestyles are continuing to live longer, but we're having too many people die from heroin and opioid abuse and death. And that's a staggering figure.
Gary from Tipton, when will the 4-page letter be ready for viewing? When will the phones be taken away? Why are they not being fired instead of being put in a different job? Does Jeff Sessions need to go, or is he being quiet and actually doing his job? Will they be able to return or retrieve the lost texts?
Some of those I'm going to just have to say I don't know. I hope so. I know that FBI allegedly, at least the perception is out there, they can retrieve things off of computers and cell phones that you thought you had erased. Unless, if you, of course, you take a hammer to it, like some of Hillary's phones and equipment went, and bleached it, yeah. But even in some of those cases, we were told in committee that they could get some information. So when I hear this, 5 months of lost emails, I'm wondering, I think the word is lost. I don't think the word should be destroyed and gone forever. It may be lost. Now, how do we find it? And that's my concern, that we have, from what I saw in the memo, that at the top echelons of the FBI, we have some bad dealing going on at the very best. That's my impression. I can't say any more than that. But that's why I think this memo and information related to it, where legal, has to be released to the American public. And I'm glad that members of Congress had at least the opportunity given to us to read it, who aren't on the Intelligence Committee. Jeff Sessions, you know, I've publicly stated I never thought Jeff was the best choice for Attorney General. Never thought he was the best senator either. So that's my own bias from my experience with Jeff Sessions. And he may be the best guy possible, it's just that I'm wrong on it. But I don't think he should have recused himself. I think that was his responsibility to step up. And I think right now there are people that are in places that are not helping investigations go on. Again, that's my perception from what I've seen. But because the public knows now that there are some documents, because the public knows now that there are people that many of us believe ought to be investigated, fired, investigated, and then indicted, I think this issue will continue. And now, last week, with information coming out of 5 months of lost emails, I think that'll add even further pressure if this is done. Wheels of government, especially federal government, are supposed to turn very slow, because the power that can come from the federal government, if misused, can be tragic and can break down freedoms for all of us, Democrat, Republican, Independent, Libertarian alike. And so while sometimes I'm frustrated with the slowness, and as I talk about the glacial pace of the Senate as I watched it this weekend, and I think there are ways they could move faster, yet don't be totally frustrated as things work through the process, because we want to make sure we do it right, and that to the best possible ability, it comes out to the majority of people that it's not just politics.
Peyton from Onsted, should the family of 4 make double the amount of income than the single parent, and if not, why?
if the person who gave that question could give me a little better idea. Well, that's combined, and we're talking about family, and we're talking about the specific needs of a family, you know, holding it all together. That includes medical expenses for four, and not just one. That includes living expenses for four, not just one. There are ways that individuals who are unmarried can combine expenses with other friends, roommates, etc. And I think that's a consideration to go there. But percentage-wise, ultimately, it's pretty similar. And when you look here, for instance, single parent with one child, 73% tax bill reduction. Family of four, 58% tax bill reduction. There's factors in there that make the difference. Thanks for asking.
This one comes from John from Onsted. The president is incapable of negotiating in an honest way. Last week, he invited the press into a meeting on immigration and made the statement that he would sign whatever was presented to him by the bipartisan committee. Several days later, he turned down the proposal by Republican Lindsey Graham and Democrat Dick Durbin. Why should anyone believe this president, and why will you not stand up to him?
Well, John, that was because they didn't follow the deal. Lindsey Graham and Chuck Schumer weren't the deal. The deal included Steny Hoyer, Mitch McConnell, Kevin McCarthy, I'm thinking around the table, Chuck Schumer, Tom Cotton, Raul Labrador, Bob Goodlatte, several others in the room. They were the ones that negotiated that agreement. Let me read that agreement again. And this has been corroborated by Democrats and Republicans this week because we've had a lot of time to talk, sitting around waiting. But those four negotiating points that were agreed to be the framework of this bipartisan group. And of course, that bipartisan group knows they got to get my support too. They're not working rogue. They have to talk with both conferences, Democrat and Republican conference, both houses, before they come back to the president. And that's what he was saying, and I think that's the wisdom of what he said. Folks, I know that I'm not going to get anything unless you guys agree to it. And if you agree to it, I'll sign it. Well, what Schumer and Lindsey Graham, who's another guy I put in with maybe a little even lower than Jeff Sessions, but nonetheless, they tried to do an end around and tried to do it in a way that they make the media jump on that as a negotiator. No, it wasn't. The agreement was DACA, top of the list, border security, that's the president's top of the list, family reunification, and visa lottery. Those negotiations are still going on. And I believe the president, when those are ended and a deal is brought, will sign it. I hope it's the Goodlatte bill, but I'm sure because of the negotiations that go between the Senate and the House, it won't be a full Goodlatte bill. But it'll be a lot better than what we have now.
John from Onsted. President Trump has been very aggressive to any news organization that says anything negative about him. This is a dangerous attack on freedom of speech. His calls about fake news and the White House's use of the term alternative facts are seen as very problematic. Yet the Republican Party and you call these attacks as very unfortunate and not helpful. You know that had a Democratic president said these things, you and your party would have cascaded him or her. Why will you not stand up to this president?
Well, he's right. He's right on this. Now, when he says it, at times, I may say, Mr. President, I wouldn't say it that way, or I couldn't say it that way. But he doesn't come from the political realm. He comes from a realm where, when he walked into a room with his staff, leadership team, in the end, it was his decision. And I think that's what he's still dealing with. But by being straight and blunt, he got elected to the presidency. And his base of supporters, of which I'm one, appreciate the fact that he's willing to be honest and open. I change some of the words at times, but I'm not him. And in the end, look at the results. An economy that's growing. I love to pull this out. I'll do it as quickly as I normally do. This we haven't seen in a long time. If you can see, this is a 12-month stock market. It's going down most of the time, right? No, it's going up. Records. The economy, the optimism. I mean, my staff here, Alex, Dustin, Stephen, we make a lot of visits to factories, to manufacturing sites, to small businesses. My gracious, for the prior 8 years, it was kind of frustrating to go to those sites and hear concerns about the cost of health insurance, about the regulatory costs, about the tax structure, the uncertainty that was there, the outside competition that they knew they could beat on quality, but they couldn't beat on cost. They knew they could beat on the efficiency of their American employees, but they couldn't beat on the regulatory climate and the tax climate that we put them under. That's changed. And if any of you, I think I can make this, and any of you want to shadow me to some of these visits, if the companies will allow that, you'd hear the same things. Optimism. Now again, sometimes the language in the tweets, when I've been over in foreign countries, Africa, Europe, invariably, the Prime Minister, President, parliamentarian says, what about these tweets? But in the end they say, it is great to see America standing strong again, because when America's strong, we feel better. That's what we hear. Now the news media won't tell you that. Most of those news media have not been over to those countries. They've not been in those meetings. They haven't sat at the table with those African presidents, prime ministers, or European. They haven't been to Poland to meet with parliamentarians there, the head of defense, security there, and hear them say, we appreciate what's going on in America. That's true news. And so when the president says, fake news, I think we'd have to take a note at it. When I get my Washington Post every day and I see 90% attacks on this administration, I've got to question that. I've got to question it. So again, let's remain to be seen. I don't think, if the news media can't take it, my oldest son is a Pulitzer-nominated journalist. So I have media in my family. I'm not against the media, but doggone it, tell the truth. Tell the truth. That's why this president has to go up and over them, using social media to accomplish that. Reagan did that, but he didn't have social media, so he just called a fireside chat, an Oval Office, and at that time, all of the networks would cover him. They didn't have cable and all the rest. They'd cover him, and he'd speak directly to people. And if I'd have been a legislator at that time, I'd have felt the heat, because he'd say, call your congressman and tell them that that tax bill, I want them to support. Call your congressman and tell them I want them to support Star Wars. And he would go over and directly to the people. That's all Trump is doing. 15% of tweets I think I'd change, but it's having a positive impact. That's my impression. You asked for my impression. So I think there has to be a free press. I'm concerned that we don't necessarily have the type of free press there today.
John Onsted, do you support the House bill titled SAF, Securing America's Future, that criminalizes DACA persons? If you support this, will you introduce legislation that requires business owners to hire DACA persons so they have a chance to meet the requirement of maintaining income of 125% of the federal poverty level?
I support that bill. That's the good lad bill. it's a good bill. It basically says that DACA recipients will be legalized if they meet the requirements to be legalized, and to be in a setting where you aren't required to live on welfare, I think is only acceptable. We have enough of our own American-born citizens who are on welfare and need some of those programs for a period of time in their life without adding to it immediately. And from what I've been told by the DACA recipients that are demonstrating in front of the Capitol and outside my office, they are contributing. And a number of them have served in the military, and a number of them are actually contributing in the workplace. So it shouldn't be a problem for them to do that. If they're criminals, they're going home. And they'll say, we don't have a home. Well, they're going to the place of their national origin where their parents came from and brought them illegally here, if they are criminals. That should be expected, shouldn't it? That's absolutely what should be expected. We have enough American-born criminals in our society, let alone deport some or keep them here. That's why Kate's Law is part of this legislation as well. I think it's a very good bill. I know it'll be amended. I know it'll be debated. And if we get it through the House and to the Senate, there'll be changes made, undoubtedly. But we want to get the best that we can. And every piece of legislation isn't a one and done. We do the best we can, get the 218 votes in the House if we can, and get the 60, sadly, in most cases 60 votes required under a stupid filibuster law that wasn't originally in the place with the Senate and is relatively new, this deal that you don't even have to stand up and speak in order to have a filibuster. But nonetheless, until the Senate changes it, that's where we're at. And that's what we work for.
John from Onsted. You have been part of the attempts to end the Affordable Care Act. You say that it has no value, yet some 160,000 Michigan citizens have been able to obtain health care because of it. Is that a bad thing? You have also stated that health insurance costs have skyrocketed under the Affordable Care Act. Do you not remember that before the Affordable Care Act was passed, health insurance costs were going up at an even higher rate?
No, not a higher rate. The facts can be shown that. But it wasn't good, I'll admit that. That's why we needed to fix it. And I hold my Republican members of Congress feet to the fire on that issue. Back when they had control of both houses and the White House under George W. Bush. That was before I arrived. I arrived with Speaker Pelosi. They had the opportunity, but I think the problem came from going for 100% for each faction, and ultimately they didn't get it done. And the problem with our health care back then was the cost. The problem with our health care today is the cost. So we've got to fix it. And I've said multiple times in meetings like this and other places that we need to go to a patient-centered approach that makes the patient and the doctor the key people in the criteria. And then let the competition begin for providing health care that meets the needs and concerns for that individual patient, pays the bill, and is covered at the most efficient cost level possible. I think we can do that. The Affordable Care Act, I think one statement that was put in there, I'll change. That the 160,000, whatever the number was, have better health care than they had before. No, they don't. They may have a health care policy, but they don't have health care when they come to use it. When they find out the out-of-pocket expenses, the deductibles, the prescription costs, you don't know how many people have written into my office, come through my office, met with me and said, when I went to use it, I found out I couldn't afford it. That's the problem. And it was a lie perpetrated in the Affordable Care Act that number one, it was affordable, number two, it provided health care. Now there are some people, I'll admit, that didn't have any health care coverage before, who because of the Affordable Care Act and the mandates that the rest of us had to pay for, had a health care policy. Whether they found benefit was a debate. And did the Medicaid usage go down? We expanded Medicaid in Michigan. And we found the resultant problems from that. So we need to fix health care. I don't care whether we call it repeal and replace or whether we call it just reform. But let's get it done. And we have a number of plans that are ready and available to work through. But we still have a Senate filibuster problem with 60 votes. The president is ready and wants to sign it. We got it through the House. Was it perfect? No. But it went the right direction. Now, we need to get our senators, our two senators, Senator Stabenow, Senator Peters, to at least step up for us in Michigan and say it's time for the Senate to deal and send something to the president. We're going to continue working on it with the Tax Cut Jobs Act. We did do away with the most onerous part of the Affordable Care Act, and that was the individual mandate. By doing away with that, in fact, we made CHIP cheaper. And ultimately, the 6-year extension cost us nothing. It paid for itself because of the cost factor and savings to the states by having CHIP versus the additional Medicaid expenses. So we're going the right direction. We'll keep moving in that direction.
John from Onsted. President George W. Bush tried to get immigration reform started, but was stopped mostly by Republicans in Congress. President Obama had the same thing happen. The same thing is happening under President Trump, except he is opposed to most immigrants. Why does your party oppose reform?
Don't oppose it at all. I won't belabor it long. I co-sponsored the Goodlatte bill, which is a full immigration reform that follows the pattern of what the people said by electing this president. Secure the borders, deal with DACA, and put an immigration reform in place so we don't have DACA again. DACA is just a symptom of a broken immigration law. We wouldn't have DACA recipients if we had followed the law. We didn't. And so we have this problem. And I don't hold that against those DACA recipients. They were brought here by their parents, illegally, but they were brought here through no choice of their own. This is their country as far as they know it. Unless they're criminals, we ought to find a way to solve their problem. But we've got to do full reform so we don't get into another DACA-like situation down the road where we failed the American people in the process, and I think we failed immigrants in the process as well. My dad immigrated with his parents from Sweden, and I'm glad he did. But they came legally. And they added to this country. You just have to look at some of the Chicago skyline to see the impact of some of my ancestry. I'm glad they came illegally, and I'm glad I'm an American. And I know that these DACA recipients want to be Americans. And I want to find a way legally to make that happen. But I want to find a way to make sure that we don't have that problem in the future.
John from Onsted. You voted for the recent tax reform package. You have always opposed deficit spending, yet this is projected to add $1.5 trillion to the debt in 10 years. The corporate rates are permanent, but the middle class rates are ended after 7 years, and there is absolutely no increased help for the poor. Oxfam, an extremely reputable agency that helps the poor, has calculated that 1% of the population hold 82% of the wealth. By supporting policies that help the wealthy more than the average citizen, you undoubtedly retain their financial support. Republicans claim that there will be so much economic growth that this will overcome the debt. Are you not aware of the economic reality of periods of growth being followed by periods of recession or depression? These are cycles that exist in reality.
I agree. There are cycles. That graph I showed you of the stock market, there'll be corrections. Absolutely. But when the underpinning principles are right, it makes it less onerous, and we can build on those. It is funny for me, forgive me for saying that, but it is funny for me to hear the left, who are willing to accept 8 years with a $10 trillion debt increase. $10 trillion. That was more the entire debt that the last administration came in to receive from all the presidents from Washington to George W. In one two-term cycle of that administration, they increased $10 trillion of debt, and they say I should take them serious when they're worrying about what CBO says will be a $1.5 trillion debt increase over 10 years? When in fact, all the indicators, if you do dynamic scoring, says that because of the growth of the economy, there won't be a deficit of $1.5 trillion, but there'll be an increase in being able to pay that off because the economy grows. That's what happens. That's why right now, we have the lowest African American unemployment rate in the history of the United States. That's why the Hispanic unemployment rate is the lowest that it's been in 18 years. That's why the female unemployment rate is the lowest it's been in, I think the number was 10 years. The economy's growing. And so it's, forgive me, please forgive me, but it is laughable to hear that same group worrying about a 1.5, even if it's true, $1.5 trillion deficit over 10 years when they didn't care about 10 trillion being developed over 8 years.
That's laughable.
I said it was laughable.
Do you remember the Great Recession?
I remember the Great Recession.
Oh, you remember that, okay.
I remember the Great Recession. And I remember the spending that went on in Congress. That has to stop. And I think because of this tax cut, we have the opportunity to also reduce the spending. And thankfully, because that was a tracker's fault.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, I'm fine.
I always have a tracker in the room for my opponents, so time stood still there. No, those are actual facts. CBO scores non-dynamically. We're trying to change that. Because economics grows if you do the right thing, and it slumps if you do the wrong thing. There's nothing static. I mean, if you look at what took place as a result of the agreement between Senator Patty Murray and Representative Paul Ryan, chairs of the budget committees in both Senate and House, Patty Murray being a Democrat, Paul Ryan being a Republican. They came to an agreement called the Ryan-Murray Plan back in 2010. And on discretionary spending, we were capable, because of that plan, and discretionary spending in our budget is only 40% of the budget. So unless a president is willing to sign changes to the mandatory areas, we can't change the mandatory expenditures. Mandatory is Social Security, Medicare, Obamacare. That's mandatory because it's law. And a president can only change law. We can change discretionary areas, certain agency expenditures, and so we did that under the Ryan-Murray Plan. So since 2011, we have increased discretionary expenditures. We've held that to the line, 2011, since 2011. So if we look at that, we've seen growth and change because of that, but just think if we'd been able to get to 60% of the rest of the budget. And do restructuring. Make sure that the mandatory areas were priority areas. Social Security, Medicare, defense, necessary things that we have priorities. So, again, they may be alternate facts to you, but bottom line is look at the growth in our economy right now. Look at the optimism. It just doesn't happen. And I'm glad we've done it. I can take one more question.
And the president has stated that we need to deport illegal immigrants that have criminal backgrounds. In the last 2 weeks, a Detroiter, George Garcia, was deported after being in the U.S. for 3 decades, having no criminal record, owning a business, and having a family. This is happening more and more. Why will you not speak up against this action by your party?
We are speaking up against this. We're saying the reason that's happening, and I don't know all the facts about him yet. I do know that he was here, came here illegally, has been here illegally, overstayed his visa. That's the evidence, folks, that our immigration system needs to be fixed, so we don't have things like this happening. So truly, if the person has, under immigration law, has the ability to get a legal status and have a visa, and know his visa is for a certain period of time to do certain things, and if he overstays, there are consequences. If he doesn't overstay, he has all the rights afforded to him or her. And it's clear, and everybody is treated the same way. We don't have these things happen. We don't have DACA. We don't have Dr. Garcia. We don't have those things going on. That's why we have to fix it. That's all we're asking. It's not an attack on immigrants. Aren't Republicans immigrants too? Right? And a result of that. Hasn't our country been enhanced? And our gene pool been enhanced because of immigration? Of course it has. Of course it has. So let's just do it legally. They're not following the law. That's the problem. And now the president is getting attacked because his agencies are following the law. He's following the law. So bottom line is, if we get back to a point where there is a law and we follow it, we follow for everybody, everybody is more secure in their setting.
He was brought as a 10-year-old.
So, well, he's not a DACA. He's not a DACA. President Obama didn't make him a DACA recipient. Let's say it that way. If President Obama didn't make him a DACA recipient, and President Obama didn't have the right to do that. That's why Trump has said, listen, the president doesn't have the right to unilaterally make this change in immigration law. It's Congress's responsibility. And if you remember, initially, Obama said the same thing. And then Congress didn't act, so he said, well, I got to do it myself. And now we've got this problem. And Trump said, listen, I don't have the authority. So we're suspending it, and Congress, you got till March to come up with a plan. And that's why we're negotiating it. And that's the progress toward, and that's why there are 3 Republican bills at least, and I know there are Democrat bills that are working their way through, and the Senate bills as well, and it'll all come to a nexus because President Trump said by March you better have it in place. And I think it's going to happen.
What's going to happen to the DACA, what they say kids, they're not 24 and older? What's going to happen to their parents that brought them over here? They're illegals too, right?
They're illegals.
So what's going to happen to them?
We don't judge the kids, punish the kids on the basis. Yeah, but I'm saying, and I've got to leave, but get the next meeting. But we should stay here longer. We don't punish in this country children for the offenses of their parents. That's the principle we start with. But we also punish lawbreakers in this country on the basis of them breaking the law. And I know that some of you don't like to hear it. But when somebody comes to this country for right or wrong reasons, and they come illegally, they are illegal until we change the law. And if we don't change the law, then they're still illegal. So give us a shot at changing the law to make it work better where it needs to work better, and more secure where it should have been more secure. That's all we're saying. No, the kids don't get citizenship. No, the kids don't get citizenship. Let me stop you right there. Let me stop you right there. I don't want it to be portrayed that these DACA recipients get citizenship. No, they don't. They get a legal status. And they have to stay legal. And if they want to become citizens, then they've got to do it the right way. Their parents will have to do it the right way too if they want to come back. And we're not having chain migration except in this proposal, except for the immediate family, mom,